Hey everybody, I hope you're doing okay. Before we get into this video, just a quick disclaimer. I have had a working relationship with at least one of the companies that is connected with the products discussed in this video. And in that regard, I may be biased, and I just wanted to let you know that up front. All right, thank you very much. And with all that said, let's get into the video. Hey everybody, Ashley here. I hope you're all doing okay. Happy fall. I hope everybody had a wonderful summer. This is a little update on my little desktop build that I did a couple of years ago. It's almost the 2-year mark, not quite. So everything's largely been really wonderful. However, I am making this update because I ran into an anomaly. I happen to be using an ASUS Crosshair Impact Mini-ITX with a 5950X. So the issue is this, everything's been really wonderful. And there's this one utility I use, and this utility, well, I'm going to get into the details of it, but it processes files and it generally works great. There's no issue at all. I use it all the time, no problem at all. But all of a sudden, I was using it with this particular workload and the system rebooted out of nowhere. And it would happen the first time I would try it or the second time I would try it. Rarely, I don't think I've ever seen it get past the second time without it just rebooting on me. So I decided to create a script that would run this thing 100 times in a row. And, you know, I would consider it fixed if I could get to 20 or 30 or maybe 50 iterations. So when the issue would occur, there'd be one of two symptoms you would see. One is the one I mentioned already, a reboot out of nowhere. So no blue screen, no crash dump, nothing like that. Now the other flavor of outcome I see is when the system remains on, doesn't reboot, the display is off, but the LEDs are, you know, going in and out, and the system fans are running and all that kind of stuff. But the LED indicator is stuck with, like, I think it's an amber light, which indicates some kind of memory issue. Now, because I don't see that all the time, and because I've seen some interesting things, as if you go back to the first video where I did the build and whatnot, you'll remember that I saw Q code, I think it was Q code 90 and white VGA, which really didn't, you know, neither of those had any connection to the issue. They kind of, when taken together, sort of indicated something was up with the processor. So in this particular case, like I would say maybe 5% of the time, I see this amber light where the system kind of stays on. I just want to see something here. Here is what I wanted to see. Whenever this thing does the thing where it doesn't fully do its thing, that thing is on. So I just wanted to capture that. Okay, let me actually turn this around. Oh, this is lovely looking. But the rest of the time I don't see it. So I don't really know if that's incidental or if there's some sort of memory transfer thing that's going on where in some cases it seizes, halts, and does not reset. In other cases where it might reset and reboot. I'm just trying to point out that 5% of the time I see it, you know, doesn't reset and reboot and get back to the OS. It kind of stops and freezes in a sense, right? Like with the fans running and everything, nothing's happening and that amber light is on. So if you've ever used that tool called 7-Zip, it's a very popular zipping tool, and it tends to use a lot of CPUs. In fact, I consider it to be probably a pretty good test to push workloads on all the CPUs. And I use it all the time and I don't see reboots, but all of a sudden with this particular workload, I can almost deterministically, it's either the first time or the second time I run the workload, which is zipping up all these files in a folder. So something about all these files that I have in a folder, the size of them, the cadence and the, you know, and the timing with which they're processed and the memory transfers that take place at the particular times in which they take place, you know, and how it coincides with, let's say, what another CPU is doing and maybe what its requests are for memory and whatnot. Something about all of that with this particular workload somehow creates this really nice repro of this issue. And so I felt really kind of fortunate to hit something so deterministic, because it could be hair pulling if you don't have something where you can rerun it over and over and over again. This is safe mode. Okay, no repro on that. Let's try again. Safe mode. I use 7-zip all the time, over here, over there, zipping this, zipping that, no problem. But this one particular workload, you know, the system will reboot, or it'll do that other thing where the amber light's on and whatnot. So the first thing I'm going to do when I'm looking at something like this, because it's a reboot out of nowhere, is I'm automatically going to be suspicious of, you know, do I need a BIOS update? Let's see if they've maybe found some bugs and get the latest BIOS in there. Let's get the latest chipset drivers. Let's, you know, update all that stuff and remove anything that's not needed. And I ran it in different, you know, in other situations with things disabled and all that kind of stuff, and I still saw the issue. So I didn't suspect any kind of conflict with other software that was installed. Now, I ran HWInfo at a 200 millisecond sample rate, and I didn't see any issues, no major thermal issues. In fact, I think there are times when I can see, you know, the thermals go much higher and there's no problem. They just come back down. But in this particular case, when it resets and reboots, it's not really seemingly any kind of thermal issue.
This is a normal boot. HWInfo is running, logging at a 200 millisecond capture rate.
So after updating the BIOS and all the drivers, chipset driver and everything, right, and trying minimal, you know, boots and, you know, without all the services running and everything like that, and not finding a resolution to this, I went, you know, naturally to the BIOS. Now, the BIOS was configured with default settings, and traditionally for me, the default settings are supposed to be the sweet, beautiful, risk-free, you know, or least risk settings, and they're supposed to be very friendly and chummy and all that jazz. And apparently, you know, that's not the case here. I wasn't going to blame the BIOS right away, but that's where, you know, I'm going to go to try to resolve something like this. And sure enough, I started playing with some settings. Now, this is long story short, but I finally decided to try increasing the memory speed so that it would match the memory that I have. I have DDR4 3600, so I changed the memory speed to 3600 megahertz. And I booted to the OS and I ran my tests and it worked fine. For 1 time, 2 time, 5 times, 10, 20, 30, 40, no reboots at all. I went back to the BIOS, I changed the setting for the memory speed to auto, and I ran my test again and it rebooted right away on the first or second try, every time. So I went back to the BIOS, I went back to the default BIOS settings. I set the DOCP profile to standard, and that actually changed the memory speed to 3600. I booted into the OS, I ran the test, and it worked fine. 10, 20, 30, 40 times, no issues whatsoever. I went back to the BIOS, I set it to auto, and the issue occurred. So, it seems to me that the memory speed needs to match the speed of my RAM. Now, I've always been under the impression that if I go with the default setting in the BIOS, it's going to either figure out what that speed is, or it's going to use something lower, and something lower is just going to be slower, but it's not going to be the end of the world. Things are just going to run slower. So I'm under the impression that auto, for a setting in the BIOS like that, is supposed to be a least risk friendly setting. But in this case, apparently it's not. You know, typically with BIOS stuff, when I'm in the BIOS defaults, you know, things are fine. But, you know, it's usually when you're trying to tweak things and add some esoteric features or increase, you know, speeds and overclocking and all this, that's usually when you run into these things where you get these reboots. So the system also too has been running fine, like I do heavy workloads. So it was something about this particular workload that it was saturating the system in a very particular way that was causing this reboot. I'm not saying it can't happen with another workload, it probably can, but there is just something that I hit a sweet spot to find this problem with this particular set of data and the way that 7-zip uses all the processors and all that kind of stuff. I also realized that setting the DOCP standard profile is probably a good troubleshooting step as well, because that happened to kick the memory speed to match the rated speed of the RAM, which was, you know, DDR4 3600. When I saw a problem with the vanilla setup, the last thing that I would have thought to do would be to enable something or add some kind of specialization or overclocking or anything like that, because you know, everything seems to indicate that that can be problematic. And I also watched a lot of things and read tech documents and people going through all kinds of stuff. And I got to tell you, nobody, that I could see was saying, you got to set the memory speed to max that, or you should set DOCP. It's always like an optional thing that you should set it. And I'm glad I decided to try the memory speed change, and I'm glad I tried the DOCP change and saw it change the memory speed. So I guess the thing I'm going to take away from this is I'm not going to assume anymore that the BIOS default settings are the least risky, friendliest settings. When I was initially setting up the system, I had actually disabled DOCP and a lot of things. I never really went back to, sort of reconfigure things or tweak things, because I'm like, hey, I'm happy with it. The speed is nice. I don't need to change anything. And what's interesting about that is largely it was okay. But then this one unique workload, for whatever reason, I don't have any other workloads that were doing that. It was just this one thing that I stumbled, and it was with a tool that I use with similar workloads and wasn't seeing any issues. It was just this one set of files happened to be pegging the internals just right to cause, to hit this issue. And when hitting this issue, the last thing I was thinking was, well, set the BIOS to something non-standard and typically more risky or faster speed or something, because that'll resolve things. That just wasn't the knee-jerk thing that I was thinking. Now, I'm not recommending that if people are trying to troubleshoot something, that the first thing they do is start majorly overclocking things into some ridiculous, kind of way. Apparently, though, in this case, matching memory speed in the configuration to my RAM resolves some issue that apparently when it's in auto is, not good enough. All right, everybody, that's it for this video. Happy fall to you. I hope if you have leaves that fall in your area, that you enjoy the scenery and the leaves and all that kind of fun stuff in fall. And if that's not your kind of fall, if you live somewhere else, I hope you enjoy whatever it is you have there in fall. Just have a good fall. Whatever you do, have a good fall. That sounds strange, actually. Have a good season fall. Don't have a good fall. Well, if you have a fall, it should be a good fall, meaning like you fall back on the couch and relax or something. Okay, anyway, forget it. All right, that's it, everybody. Take care, be well, and if you have any experiences with your own builds where you ran into something that was non-obvious, some esoteric fix or something, would be great to hear about it down in the comments below. And otherwise, happy building or whatever it is you do, happy fall, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, thanks.